The morning sunlight streamed gently through the large windows of the city airport. Travelers bustled about, carrying bags, checking tickets, and talking quietly on their phones. Among them walked a man who, to anyone else, seemed like just another ordinary passenger. His clothes were simple, a casual shirt, jeans, and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He carried a small backpack, nothing that would suggest he was anything other than a regular traveler. But in reality, he was far from ordinary. This man was the owner of one of the country's most successful airlines. He had seen airplanes land and take off from his office windows countless times, had signed papers to launch new routes, and had often listened to reports about passenger satisfaction. Yet today he was doing something he had never done before. He was flying on his own airline, completely undercover, to see for himself what passengers experienced. He paused for a moment at the entrance, taking in the lively scene around him. People were hurrying to their gates, dragging suitcases behind them. A mother was trying to calm a crying child, while a businessman juggled his laptop bag and coffee cup. For a brief moment, he felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. He had planned this trip carefully, but he knew that no matter how much planning he did, surprises were inevitable. This was not just a casual flight for him. It was a chance to truly understand what his passengers experienced every day. As he walked toward the check-in counter, he noticed small details he had never paid attention to before. The neatly stacked chairs, the clear signs guiding passengers to security, and the calm yet alert staff all gave a sense of order. He remembered how in meetings people had often told him that the customer experience was flawless. But being here in the middle of it, he realized that theory and reality could be very different. He wondered how his staff handled stressful situations, difficult passengers, and unexpected delays. At the counter, he approached a young airline employee with a friendly smile. "Good morning," he said, keeping his voice calm. He handed over his identification and ticket. The employee looked at the boarding pass, typed a few keys, and printed a receipt. She smiled politely and handed it to him without a hint of recognition. The owner felt a small thrill. So far, no one had noticed who he really was. As he made his way to security, he observed people all around him. There were travelers moving quickly and some moving slowly. He noticed a teenage boy helping an elderly man with his luggage. He saw a woman frowning at her phone, clearly frustrated by a delay in her app. And he noticed a young couple laughing as they argued over which gate to go to. All these small moments reminded him that air travel was not just about planes and schedules. It was about people, their feelings, and their experiences. Going through security was another learning moment. He watched how the officers handled each passenger with care, asking polite questions, guiding them through the scanners, and reassuring nervous travelers. One little girl was scared of the metal detector, but an officer knelt down, smiled, and showed her how it worked until she felt comfortable. The airline owner realized that these were the moments that passengers remembered, the small acts of kindness and patience that often went unnoticed in reports and statistics. Finally, after passing security, he walked toward the gate for his flight. He found a spot near the window, observing the planes parked on the tarmac. He saw the ground crew loading luggage, fueling the aircraft, and performing checks. Each action was precise and well coordinated. He felt a sense of pride knowing that all this happened under his leadership, yet he also felt curious and cautious. He wanted to see the whole journey from beginning to end, the boarding, the flight, and the landing. As passengers began to gather near the gate, he blended in effortlessly. People were chatting, some were reading, and some were scrolling through their phones. He noticed a few travelers who seemed tired or anxious, and he silently promised himself that he would pay special attention to their comfort during the flight. He wanted to see if his airline truly lived up to the promises of comfort, efficiency, and friendliness that were often advertised. The boarding announcement came, and he joined the line, careful to keep a neutral expression. As he handed over his boarding pass, he observed the gate staff interacting with passengers. A man ahead of him asked about a seat change, and the staff member responded patiently, explaining the options clearly. The airline owner smiled inwardly. This was exactly the kind of service he had hoped to see. But he knew that one or two good interactions were not enough to judge the whole experience. He needed to see the flight in action. Once on the plane, he moved down the aisle, taking mental notes of small details. The seats were clean, the overhead bins were organized, and the cabin smelled fresh. Flight attendants greeted passengers with smiles and helped them find their seats. He noticed the calm confidence in their movements. They had done this many times, yet each passenger was treated individually. He sat in his assigned seat, feeling a mix of anticipation and curiosity. He was about to experience his airline not as an owner, but as a traveler who depended entirely on the staff and the processes he had set in motion. As the plane began to taxi, he observed the reactions of the passengers around him. Some were excited, looking out the windows, while others were quietly preparing for work or sleep. He felt a connection with them, realizing that every flight was a unique story for each traveler. The young mother next to him gently held her child's hand. The elderly man across the aisle adjusted his seatbelt carefully, and a student in the row ahead fumbled with a backpack filled with books and a laptop. Each person had their own thoughts, concerns, and expectations for this journey. Throughout all this, the airline owner remained silent, taking in every detail. He noticed the subtle ways flight attendants checked on passengers, the care they took when explaining safety procedures, and the way they offered assistance with a gentle smile. These were the moments that defined the passenger experience, far beyond what any report or statistic could show. He realized that being present in this environment allowed him to understand not only the technical operations but also the human side of flying, something that could never be fully captured in meetings or emails. As the plane lifted off the runway, he gazed out the window at the city shrinking below. The sound of the engines, the smooth rise into the sky, and the calm atmosphere in the cabin all contributed to a feeling of trust and satisfaction. He thought about how passengers might feel nervous or excited, and how the airline's responsibility was not just to transport them safely, but to make the journey pleasant. He knew that every detail, from a friendly greeting to a clean seat, contributed to the overall experience. He also reflected on the purpose of his undercover trip. This was not just a test of his staff or services. It was a personal mission to reconnect with the people who relied on his airline every day. He wanted to understand their needs, hear their honest opinions, and see the truth of the experience firsthand. He knew that sometimes the best lessons came from observation, from being present in the moment, and from listening carefully without bias or preconceptions. As the flight continued, he began to relax, knowing that he could now fully immerse himself in the experience. He felt a growing sense of appreciation for the staff, the passengers, and the careful planning that went into every flight. Yet, he also knew that surprises could happen at any time, and he remained alert, ready to observe how the crew handled unexpected challenges. For him, this journey was a mixture of excitement, curiosity, and discovery, a rare opportunity to step into the shoes of a passenger and see his airline through new eyes. The hours passed smoothly as the plane cruised at altitude. The airline owner continued to take mental notes, observing interactions, small gestures, and passenger behavior. He realized that sometimes the smallest actions left the biggest impressions. A kind word, a helpful hand, or a reassuring smile could change a passenger's entire experience. He felt a sense of responsibility, not as the owner making decisions from an office, but as someone witnessing the real impact of those decisions on real people. By the time the first part of the journey ended, he had already learned more than he could have imagined. He had seen the airline from a perspective no report could ever show. He had experienced the humanity of the staff and passengers, and he had begun to understand the importance of paying attention to every detail. His curiosity was stronger than ever, and he was eager to see what the next stages of the flight would reveal. As the plane prepared for the next phase of its journey, he leaned back in his seat, ready for what was coming. He had embarked on this trip to see the truth behind his airline, and he was learning lessons that would stay with him long after the flight ended. Every sound, every movement, every conversation around him was a piece of a larger story, one that he was now part of, in a way he had never experienced before. He smiled to himself, feeling a sense of adventure and purpose. This was just the beginning, and he knew that the journey ahead would reveal more surprises, more insights, and perhaps even unexpected challenges that would change his understanding of his airline forever. Once the airline owner settled into his seat and the plane had reached cruising altitude, he began to observe his surroundings more carefully. The hum of the engines was steady, almost soothing, and the gentle vibration through the floor reminded him of the power behind the massive machine carrying them through the sky. He glanced around the cabin and noticed the subtle interactions between passengers and staff. Every small gesture, every polite word, and every moment of patience told him more than any report ever could. The flight attendants moved gracefully through the aisle, their faces calm and friendly. One of them stopped to help a young woman with a stroller, showing her where to place it securely while explaining the safety rules with a warm smile. The airline owner watched intently, noticing the way the staff member knelt slightly to make eye contact, showing genuine care. He realized that these moments were the true backbone of customer satisfaction. A simple act of kindness, often unnoticed, could make a passenger feel valued and comfortable. Nearby, a child was struggling with a small backpack, trying to lift it into the overhead bin. Another flight attendant came over immediately, offering to help, and the child beamed with relief and gratitude. The owner made a mental note. Training staff to anticipate such moments was clearly paying off. These little things mattered more than anyone might think. They were the building blocks of trust between passengers and the airline. The man sitting next to him, an older gentleman with neatly combed hair, was reading a newspaper but occasionally looked up, scanning the cabin as if he was evaluating everything. The airline owner smiled to himself, thinking how similar the man's quiet observations were to his own. He could see how different passengers experienced the flight in different ways. Some were relaxed, some nervous, and some absorbed in their work. Each person had their own story, and the owner felt fortunate to witness a small part of all those stories. The flight attendants began the meal service, moving efficiently and politely through the aisles. They offered drinks first, checking in with passengers politely before continuing to hand out snacks. The airline owner noticed how they remembered specific requests from earlier flights, a detail he had not fully appreciated before. Someone asked for tea instead of coffee, and the staff member responded without hesitation, smiling warmly. He realized that consistency and attention to detail were key elements of a positive passenger experience. While sipping his own drink, he took the opportunity to observe more passengers. A young couple in the row ahead whispered to each other, laughing softly. A teenager with headphones bobbed his head to music, completely absorbed in his world. Across the aisle, a mother gently whispered instructions to her child, teaching patience while keeping the atmosphere calm. The owner thought about how these human interactions were part of what made travel memorable. Air travel was more than a service. It was a shared human experience. The calm routine was interrupted briefly when a passenger in the back requested assistance. The flight attendant quickly approached, listening carefully, nodding, and asking questions with patience. The man observed the conversation, noticing the calm professionalism and respect shown to the passenger. It reminded him that no matter how smooth a flight seemed from the outside, challenges always arose, and the staff's ability to handle them made a huge difference. As the meal trays were collected, the airline owner reflected on the importance of empathy and service. He realized that it was not just the quality of food, seating, or timing that mattered most. It was how passengers felt during the journey. Did they feel respected? Were they treated as individuals rather than numbers? Could they trust the airline to provide a comfortable and pleasant experience? The answer, from what he had observed so far, seemed mostly positive, but he wanted to see more, especially moments that were less predictable. He looked down the aisle and noticed a young boy with wide, curious eyes, fascinated by the small details of the cabin. He smiled as he watched him press buttons, adjust his seat, and peek into the window shades. The boy's wonder reminded the owner that travel could be magical, even for simple reasons. A smooth flight, polite staff, and little comforts could create memories that lasted a lifetime. The owner realized that his airline was part of these personal experiences, shaping people's lives in ways that went far beyond the business side of things. A sudden cough from a passenger behind him drew his attention. Two people were quietly discussing the airline, sharing their honest opinions. They spoke in low voices, thinking no one else could hear. The airline owner froze slightly, straining to catch what they said without drawing attention. Curiosity mixed with caution as he listened. The comments were a mix of praise and criticism, small things that could easily be overlooked in reports but were important to the passengers themselves. He realized that this moment was a rare and valuable glimpse into unfiltered opinions. The conversation behind him made him reflect on the difference between hearing feedback secondhand and experiencing it directly. As an owner, he had received countless reports, charts, and surveys. But nothing compared to hearing people talk openly in a natural setting. He could now feel their emotions, understand their priorities, and identify areas where improvements could make a real impact. He quietly noted these observations, understanding that change often started with listening carefully before taking action. The flight continued, and he shifted his attention back to the cabin. He noticed a flight attendant helping a passenger adjust a neck pillow, ensuring comfort for the long journey. Another passenger asked a question about connecting flights, and the staff member explained patiently, offering tips and assistance. The airline owner realized that good service was not only about efficiency, but also about thoughtfulness and presence. Passengers noticed these details, even if they didn't always comment on them. He reflected on how his own perspective had changed since the flight began. Sitting in the cabin, he no longer thought only about profits, schedules, or policies. He thought about the travelers themselves, their comfort, safety, and experience. He saw the importance of creating an environment where passengers felt valued and understood, and how each small interaction contributed to that feeling. The flight was teaching him lessons he could never have learned from an office. Hours passed as the plane maintained its smooth course. The airline owner continued to observe, sometimes quietly smiling at little acts of kindness, sometimes mentally noting opportunities for improvement. He realized that being undercover allowed him to experience the truth without bias, seeing both successes and areas that needed attention. He felt a growing sense of responsibility, not only to the passengers but also to the staff, who worked tirelessly to provide a seamless experience. He noticed a pattern among the passengers. Those who were greeted warmly and assisted politely seemed more relaxed, while those who experienced even minor delays or unclear instructions appeared slightly frustrated. This observation reinforced his belief that every action, no matter how small, could influence the perception of the airline. He understood that customer satisfaction was built not only on major policies, but also on daily interactions and the consistent quality of service. The flight attendants began preparing for the next phase of service, tidying up the cabin and checking in with passengers individually. The airline owner admired their calm efficiency. They moved quietly but attentively, showing awareness of each passenger's needs. He realized that their training and dedication were critical to the airline's reputation. A single mistake could cause inconvenience, but attentive care created trust and loyalty. As the plane approached the halfway point of the journey, he looked out the window at the clouds below. The sunlight reflected off their tops, creating a peaceful and almost magical view. It was in these moments of quiet observation that he felt the full weight of the experience. He was no longer just an owner or a manager. He was a participant in the journey, sharing in the small joys and challenges of air travel. He felt connected to the passengers and staff in a way that no report or boardroom meeting could ever create. He also reflected on the importance of learning from mistakes. A small miscommunication earlier in the flight had been handled quickly, and he observed how passengers responded positively to the resolution. He realized that mistakes were inevitable, but the response mattered more than the error itself. Quick thinking, empathy, and clear communication were the keys to turning potential frustration into satisfaction. By the time the flight attendants began to offer a second round of drinks and snacks, the airline owner had formed a deeper appreciation for the complexity and humanity of the airline experience. Each passenger had their own story, each interaction had its own significance, and each flight was a unique journey shaped by countless small decisions. He understood that his responsibility was not only to maintain operations, but to foster a culture of care, attentiveness, and respect. As he settled back in his seat, he felt a sense of calm and purpose. The flight had already taught him lessons he would carry with him long after landing. As the plane continued to soar above the clouds, the airline owner leaned back in his seat, still quietly observing the cabin. He had now settled into the rhythm of being an ordinary passenger, noticing things he had never paid much attention to before: the gentle vibration of the engines, the soft murmur of conversation, and the occasional laughter from passengers created an atmosphere of calm energy. It was in this environment that he truly began to understand what made a flight memorable or frustrating for travelers. The flight attendants moved gracefully along the aisle once more, checking on passengers and ensuring everyone was comfortable. One of them stopped by an elderly woman struggling to adjust her seatbelt, Instead of just helping her mechanically, the attendant knelt down and explained each step with patience and a smile, showing genuine concern for her comfort. The owner observed this interaction closely. It reminded him that empathy was just as important as efficiency. The smallest gestures often left the biggest impressions. Nearby, a young man was attempting to organize his carry-on bag in the overhead compartment. He was having trouble fitting it in, and it kept sliding out whenever he tried. A flight attendant quickly came to assist, lifting the bag carefully and securing it. The young man thanked her, visibly relieved. The airline owner noted that these small moments of assistance were not only about practicality, but also about reducing stress. Passengers remembered these acts even if they never mentioned them explicitly. Across the aisle, a mother was trying to calm her restless child. The child was excited, fidgeting in the seat and asking endless questions. The mother looked slightly overwhelmed, but a flight attendant approached with a gentle suggestion, a coloring book and some crayons for the child. The child immediately perked up and the mother's face relaxed into a grateful smile. Watching this, the owner realized that anticipating passenger needs before they were voiced made a huge difference. Proactive care created trust and comfort, and he was impressed with how naturally his staff handled these moments. As the flight continued, he noticed passengers quietly observing each other. A group of friends laughed softly while sharing a snack. A businessman typed on his laptop, occasionally glancing up at the screen of the in-flight entertainment system. A young woman listened to music, eyes closed, swaying gently with the rhythm. The owner realized that a flight was like a small world in itself. Different people, different moods, all sharing the same space for a limited time. How that shared experience was managed determined whether the journey was enjoyable or stressful. Midway through the flight, the meal service began again. The airline owner observed the attendants carefully, noting the attention they gave to each passenger. Some had dietary restrictions, some asked for extra help, and some simply wanted water or juice. The attendants responded calmly and efficiently, remembering passengers' earlier preferences without making them repeat themselves. He thought about how difficult this must be behind the scenes, tracking details, staying attentive, and maintaining a positive attitude throughout the flight. Yet the staff handled it with grace, and he felt proud to see the human side of his airline in action. During the meal service, he quietly observed a passenger struggling with a tray that would not fit on the fold-out table. A flight attendant noticed immediately, helping to adjust it so the food could be enjoyed comfortably. The man in the seat smiled in relief, and the attendant moved on to the next passenger without missing a beat. The owner reflected on how critical it was to pay attention to these small challenges. The difference between a pleasant experience and a frustrating one often came down to these minor but meaningful interventions. Nearby, he overheard snippets of conversations that gave him a glimpse into passenger expectations. One passenger was discussing a delayed connection in a previous flight, and how a staff member had helped them navigate the situation smoothly. Another passenger commented on the comfort of the seating and how attentive the crew had been. He realized that these real, unfiltered opinions were invaluable. Reports and surveys could capture some information, but hearing passengers talk openly was an entirely different level of insight. The airline owner also noticed a few moments of tension in the cabin, small instances where passengers needed guidance. A young woman in the back row seemed confused about her seat assignment. A flight attendant approached her with patience, calmly explaining the arrangement and walking her to her correct seat. The young woman smiled and thanked her, clearly relieved. These moments, while minor, reinforced the idea that empathy, patience, and clear communication were essential for a smooth flight. The owner silently appreciated the staff's professionalism and the quiet way they diffused potential frustrations. He also paid attention to the small, positive interactions that often went unnoticed. A flight attendant offered a friendly greeting to a passenger returning from the restroom. Another helped a child retrieve a dropped toy under the seat. These gestures were small, almost invisible, yet they contributed to the overall atmosphere of care. The airline owner realized that these moments defined the culture of his airline far more than policies or procedures. It was about the way people were treated, the feeling of being seen and valued. As the flight reached cruising altitude, he observed the passengers settling into their routines. Some read books, some worked on laptops, and some simply relaxed with their eyes closed. The cabin had a gentle hum, punctuated by laughter or a soft conversation. The owner reflected on the diversity of experiences. Each person had a different reason for traveling, a different expectation, and a unique emotional state. His role as an observer allowed him to see these subtleties, understanding that the passenger experience was complex and deeply personal. During this time, he also noticed a moment that made him pause. Two passengers a few rows behind him were speaking quietly, discussing their impressions of the airline. They spoke candidly, unaware that he could hear them. Their conversation included praise and critique, some small complaints about timing and service, but also genuine appreciation for the crew's professionalism. The airline owner froze for a moment, listening closely without revealing himself. This was exactly the kind of honest feedback he had been hoping to encounter, the kind that revealed the truth beyond statistics or reports. He realized how valuable these moments were. As an owner, he had always relied on surveys and management reports, but nothing compared to hearing passengers speak naturally about their experiences. It gave him a direct insight into what worked and what could be improved. He quietly made mental notes, understanding that real improvement began with listening carefully and observing without bias. The flight attendants continued to move through the aisles, offering additional drinks and checking on passengers. One noticed a man struggling to adjust his seatbelt and immediately came to assist, explaining with a calm and friendly tone. The airline owner admired the combination of efficiency and empathy. Each staff member had a role, and they executed it while maintaining human connection with passengers. This balance, he realized, was the secret to the airline's positive reputation. He also observed moments of humor and lightness that added to the flight's pleasant atmosphere. A child asked a flight attendant about the buttons on the armrest, and the attendant explained with patience, even making a gentle joke that made the child giggle. Nearby, a group of friends laughed softly over a shared story. The owner realized that these simple moments of joy, kindness, and engagement were what passengers remembered most vividly. Throughout the journey, he paid attention to passengers' comfort in ways he had never considered before. The way seats reclined, the temperature of the cabin, the clarity of announcements, all these small details affected how people felt. A passenger adjusting a blanket or a child shifting in a seat could have created discomfort, but careful attention by the staff maintained an overall sense of calm and care. He began to understand that every element of the cabin environment, no matter how small, contributed to the overall experience. He noticed a few subtle tensions as well. Passengers who seemed anxious about their connections, those adjusting to the motion of the plane, or travelers unfamiliar with air travel. The flight attendants approached each situation with awareness, offering reassurance, instructions, and calm guidance. The owner realized that the ability to respond to subtle human needs was a skill that could not be taught through manuals alone. It required empathy, observation, and experience. As the flight progressed, he found himself reflecting on the role of leadership. It was easy to think of an airline in terms of profits, schedules, and logistics, but what really mattered were the people, the passengers, the crew, and the relationships between them. He realized that true leadership involved creating an environment where staff could act confidently and compassionately, where passengers felt respected, and where the small details were given as much importance as the big ones. By the time the first major service period ended, the airline owner had absorbed a wealth of observations. He had seen kindness, patience, efficiency, and small moments of joy and frustration. He had witnessed human behavior in its natural form, unfiltered by surveys or reports. The cabin hummed softly as the plane continued its steady flight. Passengers had settled into their routines, some reading, some working, and some quietly enjoying the journey. The airline owner, still dressed as an ordinary traveler, leaned back in his seat and observed everything with keen interest. He had already learned a great deal about the staff's attentiveness, the small gestures of kindness, and the smooth efficiency that went into making the flight comfortable. Yet he knew that sometimes the most valuable lessons came from unexpected moments, and he remained alert, ready to notice whatever might unfold next. A flight attendant passed by, offering water and snacks to passengers. She greeted each person with a warm smile and a calm tone, showing patience even when some passengers were indecisive or asked repeated questions. The airline owner silently admired the way she managed the balance between efficiency and care. It was clear that these small interactions formed the core of the passenger experience, more than any large policies or announcements could. He noted how subtle cues like maintaining eye contact or offering a reassuring smile could instantly put someone at ease. As he looked around, he noticed the quiet rhythms of the passengers' lives during flight. A mother adjusted her child's blanket, whispering softly so as not to disturb others. A young man typed rapidly on his laptop, occasionally pausing to glance at the in-flight entertainment screen. An elderly couple held hands gently, their eyes scanning the cabin with curiosity and slight anxiety about their connecting flight. These observations reminded him that each passenger had a story, a reason for travel, and unique needs that influenced how they experienced the journey. The airline owner sipped his drink, reflecting on the lessons he had gathered so far. Being undercover allowed him to see everything from the passenger's perspective: the comfort of the seats, the attentiveness of the staff, and the atmosphere of the cabin. But he also knew that the true value of this trip lay in witnessing authentic reactions, moments of unfiltered honesty that could reveal both strengths and weaknesses. He was aware that the journey was still far from over, and that something unexpected might happen at any moment. Then, as if on cue, he heard voices behind him. At first they were quiet, almost blending into the general hum of the cabin. But soon he realized that two passengers seated a few rows behind were speaking candidly about their experience on the airline. Their conversation was natural and unguarded, filled with observations, praise, and subtle criticism. The airline owner froze slightly, alert and curious, carefully listening without drawing attention to himself. The first passenger, a woman in her 30s, was commenting on the comfort of the seating. "I like the way the seats are cushioned," she said softly. "It makes a long flight much easier. And the staff has been so polite." Her companion, a man of similar age, nodded thoughtfully. "Yes, they've been very professional. But I did notice the meal service was a bit slower than expected. Nothing major, though." The airline owner's mind raced. Here in real time, he was hearing feedback he had longed to know. Honest, spontaneous, and completely genuine. He listened carefully as the conversation continued. The passengers shared their thoughts on small details: the clarity of announcements, the way flight attendants anticipated passenger needs, and the overall atmosphere of calm in the cabin. They also mentioned areas that could be improved, like slight delays in drink service and minor confusion during boarding. To the airline owner, these comments were invaluable. They provided insights far deeper than any survey or report could. The owner realized he had never felt this close to the reality of his airline. Sitting silently, he could hear the truth as it unfolded naturally without anyone holding back. The praise was encouraging and the constructive criticism was enlightening. For the first time, he could connect the ideas from reports to the lived experience of passengers, understanding exactly what worked and what could be improved. It was a rare and powerful moment of learning. The two passengers continued their discussion, now sharing personal anecdotes. The woman spoke about her previous experiences with other airlines, comparing them with this one. She noted how small gestures, like offering extra blankets or explaining connecting flight details clearly, made a huge difference. Her companion added that even a friendly smile or calm reassurance from the staff made him feel at ease, especially during turbulent moments. The airline owner nodded slightly in agreement, mentally recording each observation. He also noticed the emotional tone in their conversation. The passengers were relaxed but honest, appreciative but candid. They were describing real experiences, not trying to flatter or criticize artificially. The owner felt a deep respect for this authenticity, understanding that these were the moments that truly mattered for shaping improvements in service. He silently promised himself that he would act on these insights after the flight, using them to strengthen his airline in practical ways. At the same time, the owner reflected on how these moments could have easily been missed. Had he been sitting in a management office relying on reports, he would never have captured this candid feedback. Being present, quietly observing, allowed him to understand not only the surface details of the flight but also the emotions and perceptions of passengers. He felt a renewed sense of responsibility to ensure that every passenger, no matter who they were, experienced this level of care and attention. While listening, he also began noticing smaller, subtler interactions in the cabin. A flight attendant helped a child retrieve a dropped toy without making the child feel embarrassed. Another assisted an elderly passenger in adjusting her seatbelt, explaining each step gently. The airline owner realized that these small, often unnoticed moments were what truly defined the quality of service. It wasn't the reports, the statistics, or the schedules. It was the human attention and care that made passengers feel valued. The two passengers behind him continued talking, now mentioning the airline staff by name. They praised the professionalism, the calm demeanor, and the helpful attitude of the crew. They even speculated about how the airline must train its staff so well to maintain such consistency. The airline owner felt a sense of pride but remained quiet, careful not to reveal himself. Hearing these observations made him even more determined to continue learning from the passengers' experiences firsthand. At one point, the conversation shifted to a small complaint about the food options. The woman mentioned that while the meals were tasty, she wished there had been more variety for passengers with dietary restrictions. The man agreed, noting that small improvements could make a significant difference. The airline owner silently noted this, thinking about how minor adjustments could enhance passenger satisfaction. Even the smallest details could create a stronger, more memorable experience. The moment became more intense when the passengers, still unaware of who he was, discussed overall airline management. They mentioned scheduling, efficiency, and how the staff handled unexpected situations. The airline owner listened closely, realizing that their observations were honest reflections from the perspective of people who used the airline regularly. He felt a deep sense of clarity. Understanding real passenger experience required hearing it directly from the source, not just interpreting data or reports. Suddenly, a small jolt of turbulence passed through the cabin. The flight attendants responded calmly, reassuring passengers and maintaining a sense of safety. The airline owner watched closely, noting how their behavior affected the passengers' reactions. Even in moments of uncertainty, the crew's confidence and care reassured everyone. The two passengers behind him commented quietly on this as well, impressed by the calm and professional response. The owner silently admired their composure, recognizing the importance of training, experience, and empathy in these moments. As the plane continued its journey, he reflected on the significance of this entire experience. Being undercover allowed him to witness both the positive and negative aspects of the flight in real time. He understood the importance of listening without bias, observing without interfering, and appreciating both small gestures and larger processes. The passenger's candid feedback had opened his eyes to the practical realities of his airline, and he felt a strong sense of responsibility to act on these lessons. By now, the two passengers behind him had moved on to lighter topics, laughing quietly and sharing stories about their personal lives. The airline owner allowed himself a small smile, realizing how natural and candid their conversation had been. It was these authentic interactions that provided the clearest insight into the passengers' perceptions. He knew that no formal survey could ever capture the same depth of truth. As the hours passed, the airline owner remained attentive, observing, listening, and reflecting. Each detail, the calm efficiency of the crew, the small acts of kindness, the subtle feedback from passengers, added layers to his understanding of the passenger experience. He felt a growing sense of purpose, knowing that these insights could shape improvements that would benefit countless travelers in the future. The journey was teaching him lessons far beyond his expectations. The plane began its gradual descent, and the airline owner felt a mixture of anticipation and reflection. The journey, though seemingly ordinary, had been extraordinary in the lessons it offered. He had spent hours observing, listening, and absorbing the real experiences of passengers and staff. Every small detail, the smile of a flight attendant, the quiet gestures of help, the candid feedback from travelers, had painted a vivid picture of his airline from the perspective he had never truly seen before. Now, as the ground approached and the engines adjusted, he knew the final moments of the flight would bring new reflections and insights. Passengers around him began preparing for landing. Seatbelts clicked, tray tables were stowed, and overhead bins were checked once again. The cabin had a gentle, focused energy. People shifted slightly in their seats. Some straightened clothes, and others quietly talked to companions about the journey. The airline owner observed all of this, noting how small details of preparation contributed to comfort and safety. Even these minor actions, though often overlooked, were critical to the smooth functioning of a flight. The two passengers he had overheard earlier were now quietly chatting about future travel plans, clearly satisfied with their experience. The airline owner felt a quiet satisfaction himself, realizing that the positive aspects of the flight had been noticed and appreciated. Yet he also thought about the constructive feedback they had given. The slow drink service, small delays, and limited food options were minor issues, but they highlighted the importance of continuous improvement. He understood that learning from these observations could enhance the experience for all passengers on future flights. As the plane adjusted its descent, the airline owner reflected on the people who had made this flight successful. The staff, from the flight attendants to the pilots and ground crew, had worked seamlessly, balancing efficiency with empathy. Their training, experience, and human touch had created a safe, comfortable, and even enjoyable journey. He realized that the success of the airline was not just about schedules, airplanes, or profits, it was about people. Those who worked diligently, cared sincerely, and responded gracefully in every situation were the true foundation of the airline's reputation. Looking around the cabin, he noticed subtle moments of interaction during the final moments of the flight. A flight attendant bent down to reassure a nervous passenger about the landing. A young child excitedly pointed out the city lights below, and an attendant smiled and shared in the excitement. An elderly couple held hands tightly, showing trust in the crew's guidance. These small moments reflected the human side of travel, the care, attention, and presence that made journeys memorable. The airline owner realized that these interactions were not only vital for passenger comfort, but also inspiring for anyone in leadership. He thought about the passengers' perspectives more deeply. Each person had their own story, their own reasons for traveling, and their own expectations. Some were on business trips, others on vacations, and some were returning home after long periods away. Their satisfaction depended not only on the technical aspects of the flight, but on the way they were treated, the attentiveness of the crew, and the small gestures that made them feel valued. He understood that empathy and awareness were just as important as logistics and efficiency. As the plane lowered through the clouds, the airline owner reflected on his own role in shaping the airline's culture. He had always focused on management, finances, and growth. But this journey reminded him that leadership was also about understanding and serving people. It was about creating an environment where staff could excel, passengers could feel respected, and each small detail was attended to with care. Leadership, he realized, was measured not only by success on paper, but by the lived experience of everyone touched by the organization. The cabin announcement reminded passengers to return their seats and prepare for landing. The airline owner listened carefully to the tone, clarity, and friendliness of the message. He noted how even the choice of words, the calmness in the voice, and the timing contributed to a sense of comfort and assurance. These small elements, often unnoticed, were integral to the overall experience. He understood that every detail mattered, and that attention to these subtleties created a lasting impression on passengers. As the wheels touched the runway, the cabin reacted with quiet relief and appreciation. Some passengers sighed, others smiled, and a few exchanged glances, silently sharing the joy of a safe landing. The airline owner felt a deep sense of pride and connection. This landing was more than a technical procedure. It was the culmination of hours of teamwork, care, and attention to human needs. The flight had been successful not only in reaching its destination safely, but in creating a positive, memorable experience for everyone on board. Once the plane taxied to the gate and passengers began disembarking, the airline owner remained seated for a few moments, absorbing the scene. People moved steadily, some waving to crew members, others chatting quietly with companions. He watched as flight attendants ensured that everyone left comfortably, assisting with luggage, answering questions, and guiding travelers with patience. These final interactions were as important as anything that had happened during the flight. They left a lasting impression, a final note of care and attention that passengers would carry with them. Stepping off the plane, he felt the atmosphere of the airport differently now. What had seemed ordinary before now felt alive with stories, emotions, and experiences. Travelers walked with purpose, chatting quietly or glancing around as they collected luggage. He understood that his airline was part of a larger journey for each passenger, a journey filled with hopes, expectations, and memories. The realization reminded him of the responsibility he held as an owner, not just for operations but for the human experience of travel. Walking through the terminal, he reflected on the lessons of the flight. He had seen the airline from the passenger perspective, witnessing genuine satisfaction, small frustrations, and moments of delight. He had observed the crew's professionalism, patience, and empathy. Most importantly, he had heard unfiltered feedback directly from travelers, learning what truly mattered to them. These insights were invaluable, far beyond any report or statistic. He thought about the improvements he could make. Some were small, adjusting meal options, speeding up drink service, refining announcements. Others were larger, training staff to anticipate passenger needs more effectively, enhancing comfort features, and improving communication at all stages. He realized that leadership was about continuous improvement, learning from real experiences, and acting on insights to create better journeys for everyone. The airline owner also reflected on the importance of presence. By being on the flight himself, he had connected directly with both staff and passengers. He had seen the impact of decisions he had made from a boardroom, felt the reality of his policies, and understood the human side of the airline in ways he never could have otherwise. He realized that true understanding required stepping into the shoes of those you serve, observing carefully and listening with empathy. As he walked through the busy airport, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He wanted to ensure that every flight, no matter how routine, reflected the same level of care, professionalism, and attentiveness he had observed today. He thought about how small changes could ripple through the airline, creating more comfortable, enjoyable, and memorable experiences for passengers. This journey had given him clarity, insight, and inspiration. He also reflected on the passengers he had overheard talking candidly. Their honest feedback had been a turning point, showing him what they truly valued and what could be improved. It reminded him that listening to the people you serve is the foundation of excellence. While reports, meetings, and statistics were important, nothing compared to the first-hand experience of being present, observing, and hearing genuine opinions. Later, as he reached the exit of the airport and prepared to resume his usual identity, he felt a quiet satisfaction. The undercover flight had achieved more than he expected. He had learned about the subtlety of human experience, the importance of empathy, and the impact of small, thoughtful gestures. He had gained insights that could transform his airline and improve the journeys of countless passengers. And he had done so while fully immersing himself in the world of the travelers he cared about so deeply. He smiled to himself, knowing that this experience would stay with him forever. The lessons were clear. Leadership required presence, observation, and empathy. The small details mattered as much as the big ones, and genuine care for people created lasting impressions. Most importantly, he understood that serving passengers was not just a business task, it was a human responsibility. Every flight was an opportunity to make a positive difference. As he stepped outside into the bright sunlight, he felt a sense of fulfillment. This flight had been more than a journey through the sky. It had been a journey of understanding, learning, and reflection. He had discovered truths that could not be captured in reports, statistics, or meetings, and with these truths, he could now take action to ensure that every passenger on every flight experienced the care, comfort, and attentiveness that he had witnessed firsthand.